They fired him at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. No ceremony. No witnesses worth remembering. Just a conference room on the 4th floor with a frosted glass door and a woman in a charcoal blazer who didn't look up from her tablet when she said his name. Daniel Hayes. Night maintenance technician. Performance category: below standard. He signed the termination form with a pen that had run low on ink. He pressed hard enough to leave an impression on the page beneath it. Then he picked up his canvas backpack, the one with the frayed strap that his daughter had once drawn a small yellow sun on with a Sharpie, and he stood. "Before I go," he said. His voice was quiet. Not angry, not wounded. Just precise, the way a person speaks when they have already calculated every variable and accepted every outcome. "Don't run the system update tonight." The woman behind the desk, Victoria Crane, Chief Executive Officer, 3 months into her role, finally looked up. "Excuse me?" "The scheduled update. 1700 hours. Don't run it." She studied him for a moment. A man in his mid-30s, unremarkable in appearance, a little tired around the eyes. The kind of man who blended into a building the same way an electrical panel does. Functional. "Forgettable. Mr. Hayes," she said. "You no longer work here." He nodded once. Picked up the pen. Set it on the desk parallel to the edge. Perfectly parallel. She would notice later, though she couldn't say why she remembered it. Then he walked out. The hallway cameras tracked him to the elevator. The elevator cameras tracked him to the lobby. The lobby cameras tracked him through the front doors into the pale November light. At 2:17 the following morning, every door in the facility opened at once. The Meridian Complex sat 22 miles outside the city, at the end of a 2-lane road that didn't appear on most navigation applications. It was not secret in the dramatic sense. No fences with razor wire. No guards with earpieces standing at attention. It was secret the way bureaucratic things are secret. Through obscurity. Through paperwork. Through the sheer absence of any reason for an ordinary person to go looking for it. The parking lot held 43 vehicles on a busy day. The break room smelled of burnt coffee and old microwave popcorn. The most classified room in the facility had a hand sanitizer dispenser mounted beside the door that was always empty. Inside, the work was not ordinary. Meridian ran a defense-adjacent AI system called Arbor Autonomous Resource-Based Operations. Runtime designed to manage classified data infrastructure for 3 federal agencies simultaneously. It had been built over 7 years, updated quarterly, and watched over by a team of 26 engineers, 2 security directors, and 1 very new CEO, who had been brought in specifically to cut costs and modernize the personnel structure. Daniel Hayes was not an engineer. His badge said Maintenance Technician, Night Shift. He earned $41,000 a year. He worked from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Walking the halls of the server wing. Checking temperature gauges. Replacing failed cooling units. Logging anomalies in a green spiral notebook he bought in packs of 3 from the discount bin at the office supply store. He was, by every official measure, unremarkable. The other technicians on the day shift didn't know his last name for the first 4 months he worked there. The security director, a former Army officer named Marcus Webb, had approved Daniel's clearance without reading past the first page of his background file. The engineering team referred to him, when they referred to him at all, as the night guy. What they noticed, when they noticed anything, he slept in the server room. Not always, not obviously, but sometimes. On the long, quiet stretches between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the halls were empty and the only sound was the sustained white noise of cooling fans, a camera on the east corridor would catch him in a chair beside server rack 7, head tilted back, eyes closed. It looked like negligence. It looked like a man who didn't care enough to stay awake, but no one looked closely enough to see the notebook open in his lap. No one looked at the entries, small, dense, written in mechanical pencil that dated back to the day he started. No one compared those entries to the system's maintenance logs and noticed that every minor failure Daniel recorded in his notebook had been addressed, silently, before it appeared in the official system. He did not report these fixes. He did not enter them into the computerized maintenance database that the engineering team used to track facility health. He fixed things by hand, quietly. In the way a person maintains something they built themselves and understand in a way that transcends documentation. His daughter's name was Lily. She was 8 years old. She had a heart condition, a congenital defect that had been repaired surgically when she was 4, but that required ongoing monitoring, medication, and quarterly cardiology appointments at Children's Hospital. The medication alone cost more than Daniel's monthly grocery bill. The appointments required him to miss work, which he documented precisely and made up on weekends, which no one ever authorized, but no one ever questioned, because no one was paying close enough attention. He kept a photograph of her tucked into the front pocket of his backpack. Not displayed, just carried, the way some people carry a coin or a stone. Something to press a thumb against in the dark. He had been working at Meridian for 3 years and 4 months. He had never once been late. Victoria Crane had come to Meridian with a mandate. The board wanted efficiency. The board wanted modernization. The board, most specifically, wanted a personnel audit that would identify redundancies and eliminate them cleanly before the new fiscal year created any awkward optics around headcount reduction. Victoria had done this before at a logistics company in Denver, at a biotech firm in Massachusetts. She was very good at it. She did not take pleasure in it, exactly, but she did not experience guilt about it either, which she had come to understand was something of a professional gift. She had spent her first 6 weeks at Meridian reviewing personnel files, productivity metrics, and shift performance reports. She had built a color-coded spreadsheet. She had identified 11 positions that could be restructured, consolidated, or eliminated entirely. Daniel Hayes was in the red column. The supporting documentation was straightforward. He had been formally noted for sleeping during shift twice in the past year, both times by day shift engineers who had arrived early and found him in the server room. He had not filed a single entry into the computerized maintenance database in 3 years. His technical certifications were current, but his performance reviews were sparse. 2 supervisors had simply written adequate and moved on, which in the language of institutional HR meant we never thought about him long enough to say anything specific. On the Monday before he was terminated, Victoria had called a personnel review meeting with the 2 department heads and Marcus Webb. She had presented the spreadsheet. She had made her case with the particular economy of language that comes from having made the same case many times before. He's not performing to standard, she said. The role requires active documentation and system engagement. He's done neither. Marcus Webb had started to say something. He'd paused, frowned slightly, and then said only, "He's reliable." "Reliable isn't a metric," Victoria said. She signed the termination paperwork that afternoon. The meeting with Daniel the following morning lasted 9 minutes. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. She had expected one or the other. Most people did one or the other. Instead, he'd said his strange thing about the update schedule, and then left with the composure of a man who had already processed his grief about this somewhere else, at some earlier hour, before she had ever called him into the room. She spent the rest of the morning in budget meetings. By afternoon, she had forgotten the specific texture of his face. By midnight, she would not be able to stop seeing it. The Arbor update was a significant one. It had been in preparation for 6 weeks, a comprehensive patch to the system's access control framework, designed to bring it into alignment with a new federal security protocol. The engineering team had been working on it in segments, testing each component in isolation, confident in the methodology. The lead engineer was a man named Christopher Aldridge, 31 years old, Stanford educated, the kind of person who expressed technical confidence, not through arrogance, but through a calm and absolute certainty in his own preparation. He had reviewed the update package 4 times. He had run it through a simulation environment twice. He had not read Daniel Hayes's notebook. He did not know the notebook existed. At 4:50, 2 inches the afternoon, 6 hours before the scheduled update, a junior engineer named Priya Mehta had flagged something small, a discrepancy in one of the legacy log files, a formatting anomaly that didn't match the standard output of Arbor's logging system. She'd sent a message to Christopher. He'd looked at it, noted that it was a cosmetic irregularity in a non-critical log category, and told her not to worry about it. At 5 p.m., Priya had walked past the server room and stopped for a moment in the hallway. She couldn't have said what stopped her. Only that the room felt different with Daniel not in it. She had never thought much about Daniel, but absence, she was discovering, has its own texture. She went back to her desk. She did not flag the anomaly again. At 5 p.m., the night shift came on without Daniel Hayes. His replacement was a contractor from a staffing agency, a man named Trevor Solis, 26. Experienced with standard data center environments. Unfamiliar with Meridian's specific architecture. He had been briefed for 40 minutes that afternoon. He had nodded at all the right moments. At 9 p.m., Christopher Aldridge initiated the Arbor update. The first 20 minutes were textbook. The system acknowledged the patch, began validating component hashes, started the sequential installation process. Status lights across the monitoring board held steady green. Christopher watched from the operations room, coffee in hand, the particular satisfaction of a man watching something he built do exactly what he told it to. At 9:22, a single light changed from green to amber. Christopher set down his coffee. Amber became red at 9:31. By 9:45, 3 of the 5 monitoring stations in the operations room had gone to black screens, not crashed. That was the strange part. Not error messages, not failure codes, just black. The way a screen goes black when it's waiting for input that hasn't arrived. At 10:14, Arbor activated what its own documentation described as a protective isolation protocol, a subroutine that, in theory, was designed to wall off compromised sectors during an update gone wrong. In practice, what it did was lock every door in the facility simultaneously. Not the exterior doors, which ran on a separate system. The internal doors. The server room. The operations room. The corridor between them. Christopher Aldridge found himself unable to leave the operations room. He tried his access card on the panel beside the door. The panel acknowledged the card, the light blinked green, and then did nothing. He tried again. Same result. Through the glass panel in the door, he could see the hallway. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights had dimmed to roughly 40% of normal, which Arbor's power management subroutine apparently considered appropriate for an isolation event. The ambient light was blue-gray and flat, the color of something just before dawn. He called Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb called Victoria Crane. Victoria arrived at the facility at 11:48 p.m. She had dressed in the dark, which explained why she was wearing a blazer over a collarless undershirt, a combination she would not have chosen deliberately. She walked through the facility. The interior doors, she noted, had unlocked again, sometime between 10:14 and her arrival, and into the operations room, where Christopher Aldridge was standing in front of a monitoring board that displayed 3 words in pale amber text: manual layer active. "What does that mean?" she said. Christopher looked at her with the expression of a man who has been awake for too long already. "I don't know," he said. "It's not in any of our documentation." She looked at the screen for a long moment. What happened at 10:14? The system locked. All internal doors. But they're open now. They opened at, he checked his log, 2:17. No command had been issued. No override had been entered. No one had touched a panel, or a keyboard, or any access interface in the building. At 2:17 a.m., every door in the Meridian complex had simply opened, as if a decision had been made and carried out by something they could not see. "Run a log trace," Victoria said. "Find out what issued that command." The trace ran for 18 minutes. When it completed, Christopher read the result and then read it again, more slowly. "There's no command in the log," he said. "The doors opened, but Arbor has no record of opening them." Victoria sat down in the nearest chair. The monitoring board hummed. The fans in the server racks, audible through the wall, ran at a frequency just below the threshold of conscious annoyance. She thought about a man with a frayed backpack and a pen pressed too hard against paper. Don't run the update tonight. By 1 a.m., the engineering team had given up trying to restore normal operations through conventional means and shifted to forensics. What they found, over the next 2 hours, was this. Beneath Arbor's standard operating framework, beneath every layer of code that Christopher Aldridge and his team had written, tested, documented, and submitted for federal review, there was another layer. Not hidden in the dramatic sense, not encrypted or obfuscated, just built differently, in a syntax that predated the current system's architecture by several years, in a style that belonged to an older school of engineering, manual, analog in its logic, dependent not on automated checks, but on the sustained attention of a human being who was present and watching. It had no name in any of their documentation. It appeared in the logs only as a subroutine identifier that no one had ever thought to trace. MHD, Guardian. The initials, Priya Mehta noted quietly, were MHD. She pulled Daniel Hayes's personnel file. His full name was listed on the second line. Marcus Daniel Hayes. She set the file down on the desk and looked at Christopher. Christopher looked at the monitoring board. The monitoring board said, Manual layer active in pale amber letters that had not changed in 2 hours. He built this, Christopher said. Not a question. He built the whole system, Priya said. She had found it in a file buried in the oldest archive directory on the facility's network, a project credit document from 7 years prior, before the facility was operational, when Arbor was still in development. The lead architect on the access control framework was listed as M.D. Hayes, Principal Systems Engineer. The document was signed. The signature matched. He left, Marcus Webb said from the doorway. He had been quiet for the past 20 minutes, reading something on his phone. His wife died 4 years ago. He requested a transfer to night maintenance and a demotion. I have the paperwork here. He held up his phone. He signed a non-disclosure agreement as part of the transfer. He agreed not to discuss his role in the original build. The room was very quiet. Why? Victoria said. Marcus looked at her steadily. The file says, personal reasons. A very young engineer named Samuel Garrett, who had been sitting in the corner running trace logs and had said nothing for the past hour, looked up from his screen. The manual layer, he said. I think I understand what it does. Everyone looked at him. It's a failsafe, he said. But not the kind we built. Ours is automated. If the system detects a critical error, it shuts down and waits for a manual restart. His layer does something different. If the system enters a state where normal operation is compromised, and no authorized user intervenes within a specific window, it doesn't lock down. He paused. It opens up. To prevent a permanent deadlock, it's a pressure release valve, a manual one, designed to be reset by someone who knows it's there. He looked at the board. Without him here to reset it, he said, it just runs on its own protocol, opening and closing, trying to maintain the conditions he trained it to maintain. But without him, he stopped. It's looking for him, Priya said. No one disputed this, though several people in the room would have found the statement embarrassing to say themselves. Victoria Crane stood up. Get me his address. Marcus drove. Victoria sat in the passenger seat and read the file on her phone. Marcus Daniel Hayes, born, Fort Collins, Colorado. Age, 34. Education, B.S. Computer Engineering, University of Colorado. M.S. Systems Architecture, MIT. Employment history, 7 years. 7 years at a firm called Harlow Systems Group, where he had worked on the Arbor project from its earliest conceptual stages. He had been, by all accounts, exceptional not in the visible, conference-speaking way, but in the way that people who do the foundational work are exceptional. He built the bones of things. He made the decisions that no one notices when they work, and that everything breaks on when they don't. His wife's name was Claire. She had died at 31 from an aortic dissection, a catastrophic event, sudden, no warning. She had been sitting at the kitchen table, helping their daughter with something, Lily, who had been 4 at the time. and then she was not. Daniel had taken a leave of absence. When he returned to work, it was as maintenance technician, night shift, at the facility that ran the system he had built. The paperwork didn't explain why. The paperwork never explained the things that mattered. Victoria thought about a man sitting in a server room at 3 a.m., the blue light of monitors, a spiral notebook, a sleeping posture that was not sleep. She thought about the notebook and wondered what was in it, whether it was notes or calculations or something more like a conversation with a system that only he fully understood. She thought about what Samuel Garrett had said. It's looking for him. The car turned off the highway onto a surface street, then onto a smaller street, then into a neighborhood of small houses with small yards, the kind of neighborhood where the streetlights are spaced too far apart and the sidewalks heave from tree roots that no one has gotten around to addressing. The houses were tidy, mostly, economical, the kind of neighborhood where people worked hard and slept when they could. Marcus parked in front of a house with a blue front door. The porch light was on. Victoria rang the bell. She heard, from inside the house, a small sound she couldn't immediately identify, a mechanical clicking, rhythmic, like a pump or a motor. Then footsteps, light ones, and then the door opened. A girl stood in the doorway. 8 years old, dark-haired, wearing pajamas with small planets on them. She looked at Victoria with the unclouded assessment of a child who has not yet learned to be strategic about first impressions. "Hi," the girl said. "Hi," Victoria said. Then, because she found, unexpectedly, that she didn't know how to continue. "Is your dad home? He's in the kitchen." The girl glanced behind her, then back at Victoria. "He fixes my machine at night sometimes, when it makes the wrong sound." She said this in the same tone she might report the weather, informative, without drama. "Lily." Daniel's voice came from somewhere deeper in the house. Not a warning exactly. Just her name, placed in the air between them. "It's a lady," Lily called back. "And a man." Footsteps on a hardwood floor. Then Daniel appeared behind his daughter, still wearing the same clothes from that morning, Victoria realized. Or very similar ones. He looked at her with those eyes that had been doing too much for too long, and were very good at not showing it. "Mr. Hayes," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then he looked at Marcus, who stood behind her on the front walk. Marcus had his hands in his pockets, and was studying the street. "Come in," Daniel said. The house was small and very organized. This was the first thing Victoria noticed, the intentionality of the space, the way every object had been given a specific place and was in it. Lily's shoes were paired by the door. The mail on the counter was sorted and stacked. On the kitchen table, beside a glass of water and a half-eaten piece of toast, was the green spiral notebook. A new one, she saw. By the stiffness of the spine, in the corner of the kitchen, on a low table, sat a medical device the size of a shoebox. It was connected by a tube to a small, careful apparatus that sat on Lily's beside table, visible through an open doorway. The device was running. That was the clicking sound, a small pump, steady, persistent, doing its job. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter. He had not offered them coffee or chairs, not out of rudeness, but out of a kind of pragmatic neutrality. He was waiting. "The system," Victoria started. "I know," he said. She stopped. "The doors opened at 2:17, he said. "That's the first cycle. It'll go through 3 cycles before the protective isolation fully degrades. After that, Arbor's core will start reading the update as valid data and begin to integrate it. Some of the update is fine." He paused. "Some of it isn't." "How do you know what time it is?" Marcus said. Daniel looked at him. "Because I built it. I know how long the cycle takes." He picked up the green notebook. Not looking at it, just picking it up. "The way you pick up something familiar. How much has degraded? We don't know exactly. The monitoring board says, manual layer active." He said it the same way the board displayed it, flat, informational. "That means the primary handshake has failed, but the secondary containment is holding. You have approximately," he glanced at the clock on the microwave, 4 hours and 40 minutes before the integration begins. Victoria looked at him. "Will you come back?" she said. It was not a negotiation opener. It was not a rhetorical pivot. She heard, with some surprise, that it was simply a question the kind you ask when you don't know the answer and you need it. Daniel was quiet for a moment. On the other side of the open doorway, Lily had gotten back into bed and was reading something, or pretending to, in the way that children pretend to be busy when they are actually listening. "What happened to the update package?" Daniel said. "It's partially integrated. We can't tell which segments installed correctly. The access control revision? That's where we saw the first failure." He nodded. This was not surprise. The input validation sequence in the new access control framework has a collision with the legacy authentication protocol I built in year 2. It's not documented. I found it in testing and patched it manually. The patch is in the manual layer, not the main codebase. He looked at her steadily. "No one on your team would have known to look for it. Christopher ran simulations against the documented architecture," Daniel said. "Not unkind. Just precise. Not against the whole system." The pump in the corner clicked on and off. Lily turned a page. "I'll come back," Daniel said. He set the notebook down. "But I need to be home by 7. She has school." "Of course," Victoria said. He looked at her for just a moment longer, not to assess her sincerity, she thought, but because he was the kind of person who looked at things long enough to see them clearly before turning away. "Let me get my bag," he said. They arrived at the facility at 3:41 a.m. The parking lot was full, which it had never been at this hour. Every engineer Christopher Aldridge had been able to reach was there. 3 people, Victoria didn't recognize, were standing by the entrance doors, and it took her a moment to understand that they were from the client agencies, the 3 federal bodies whose data Arbor managed, and that someone, probably Marcus, had notified them. Daniel walked through the lobby without looking at any of it. In the operations room, Christopher Aldridge stood in front of the monitoring board with the expression of a man who had been awake for 19 hours and was beginning to have trouble hiding it. He looked at Daniel when Daniel walked in. A complicated thing moved through his face, not resentment, exactly. More like the recognition that arrives when you realize the map you've been using is not of the territory you're standing in. "The 3rd cycle started at 3:32, Christopher said. "We're tracking degradation in sectors 4 and 7. Those are the input validation sectors," Daniel said. He looked at the board. "Show me the full log." Christopher showed him the full log. Daniel read it in silence for 4 minutes. Not scanning reading, in the way that someone reads something they wrote a long time ago and are rediscovering what they meant. Then he sat down at the terminal in the center of the room. Not Christopher's terminal. The one at the back, the oldest one. The one no one on the current team had ever used because it predated the current system interface. It still had a mechanical keyboard, the good kind. The kind that clicked satisfyingly with every keystroke, the kind that had been considered outdated for years and had been kept only because no one had gotten around to replacing it. He opened a terminal window that the rest of them had never seen before. "What is that?" Samuel Garrett asked from across the room. "Direct interface to the manual layer," Daniel said. He didn't look up. His fingers were already moving. Priya Mehta drifted closer. Drawn by the syntax appearing on the screen, a language she half recognized. An older dialect of the system's base code, modified in ways that felt almost like a personal accent. "The main issue," Daniel said, speaking aloud without addressing anyone in particular, speaking the way a person sometimes speaks when thinking, as a form of external processing, is that the update's access control revision is trying to write over the collision patch. It sees the patch as an anomaly, and it's flagging it for removal. Once the patch is removed, the legacy authentication protocol and the new framework will try to run simultaneously. He paused. "They can't. One of them will lose." "Which one?" Christopher said. "The legacy protocol. It'll crash the authentication layer entirely. No one will be able to access anything. Any door that was last state locked will stay locked. Any door that was last state open." He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. The implications spread through the room without being spoken. A defense facility. Doors that couldn't be secured. Data that couldn't be accessed. The cascading consequences of both. Daniel's fingers moved over the mechanical keyboard. The sound of each keystroke was very clean in the quiet room, a precise, unhurried rhythm, like a person who is not typing fast because they are not guessing. They are not trying options. They know where they are going. He entered a sequence, paused, entered another. The monitoring board flickered. Manual layer active. The text was still there. But beside it, something new appeared. A secondary status field, previously empty, that now read, "Handshake initializing." "What did you do?" Priya asked. "I told it I'm here," Daniel said. He looked at the board. The board, in its flat, unmetaphorical way, considered this. Handshake confirmed. The amber text on the board began to cycle through a series of status updates too fast for most people in the room to read. Daniel watched it without apparent urgency. He reached for the mechanical keyboard again, entered 3 more lines of code, deliberate, slow, the kind of speed that comes from precision rather than hesitation, and leaned back. The monitoring board cleared. Then, one by one, from left to right across the status panel, the indicators began returning to green. Not all at once, not dramatically, one after another, at the pace of a system restoring itself through a careful and trusted process. Each light acknowledging that the thing it monitored was stable, contained, and understood. At 4:02 a.m., the main display read, Arbor Core, stable. Manual layer. Disengaged. Update integration. Suspended. Awaiting. Authorized review. The room was very quiet. Christopher Aldridge looked at the board for a long time. Then he looked at Daniel. "The update integration is suspended," he said. "What does that mean for the patch schedule?" "It means you need to fix the collision before you finish the update," Daniel said. He was already writing in the green notebook, not the one from home, a different one. One he had taken from the cabinet under the terminal without anyone noticing when he'd opened it. "I'll give you the documentation." He wrote for several minutes. Then he tore out the pages carefully, along the perforated edge, and held them out to Christopher. Christopher took them. He looked at the handwriting mechanical pencil, small and dense, technically precise and legible in a way that felt almost aggressive, given how long these things had gone undocumented. "How long have you known about the collision?" Christopher said. "Since the 2nd year," Daniel said. "I reported it to the lead engineer at the time." "And?" "He said he'd log it." A pause. "I don't think he logged it." The room absorbed this. Outside, through a window that faced east, the sky was beginning to change in the way that skies change before dawn. Not lighter exactly, but different in its darkness, as if the darkness were becoming less committed to itself. "I need to get home," Daniel said. He closed the notebook, picked up his backpack, stood. No one moved to stop him. No one knew quite what to say, which was perhaps appropriate, because what had happened in the past several hours was not the kind of thing that resolves cleanly into language. Victoria Crane was standing near the door. She had not spoken in 40 minutes. She had watched, and she had thought about watching about what it meant that for 3 years, in this building, she had somehow looked directly at something and seen nothing. "Mr. Hayes," she said. He stopped. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry." It came out without the practiced quality of an executive apology. It came out small, and specific, and real. He looked at her. Not coldly, not warmly. With the same precision, he applied to everything, measuring, calculating, arriving at a conclusion. "I'll be available," he said, "if you need me." And then he walked out, into a hallway that had been locked 8 hours ago, through a lobby full of people who were now paying the closest attention they had ever paid to a person they had spent years not noticing, and out through the front doors into the early morning that was cold and turning, very slowly, toward light. Victoria Crane did not sleep. She sat in the operations room until the sun had fully risen, and the day shift began arriving, each of them walking in to find the monitoring board green, and a silence in the room that felt residual, like the silence after something that hasn't quite been resolved. She called her assistant at 8:15 and canceled her meetings for the day. Not rescheduled. Cancelled. She asked Marcus Webb to pull the full personnel file, not the one she had reviewed before, the abridged version, the one that showed performance metrics and shift reports, the full file. Every document. She read it in a conference room with a cup of coffee that went cold. She read the original project credits, the transfer request, the non-disclosure agreement. She read a performance review from 3 years ago, written by a supervisor who no longer worked at the facility, that said only, "Hayes is consistent and unobtrusive. He doesn't create problems." She thought about what it meant to write that about a man who had been, for 7 years, the reason the system worked, and who had then chosen to become invisible rather than continue in a world that had reconfigured itself around an absence he couldn't fill. She thought about Lily in her planet pajamas, standing in a doorway, listening. She thought about the medical device clicking in the corner of the kitchen. She thought about what Daniel had asked for when she had pushed the envelope across the table and told him to name his terms. He had thought for a moment. He had not made her wait long. "I need flexible hours," he had said. "Her appointments are Thursday mornings. I need Thursday mornings." Done. And the health coverage needs to include cardiac specialists without a referral requirement. "I'll have legal draft it." He had looked at the envelope. He hadn't touched it. "That's it?" she had said. He had nodded. She had expected more. She had expected the negotiation that someone in his position, the only person who fully understood a classified system that 3 federal agencies depended on, could have reasonably conducted. She had expected him to know his leverage and use it, the way anyone rational would use leverage. But he wasn't thinking about leverage. She understood this now, sitting in the conference room with the cold coffee. He wasn't thinking about what the system was worth, or what his knowledge was worth, or what she owed him. He was thinking about Thursday mornings and cardiac specialists and getting home by 7 so his daughter could get to school. She put down the file. She thought about what it cost a person to build something. Really build it. From the ground up, the way only someone who fully understands both the theory and the grain of the material can build it, and then to set it down. Not abandon it. Not walk away. Set it down, quietly, and become the person who watches over it from a distance, who keeps it alive in ways no one can see, because there is a child who needs watching over more. She thought about a pen placed parallel to the desk's edge. She thought, "I looked at him and saw nothing, and he let me." The appointment was at 10. Daniel drove Lily to the hospital in a car that had 140,000 miles on it, and made a sound when you accelerated that the mechanic had described as not urgent, but worth addressing. Lily sat in the passenger seat with a library book open on her lap, reading with the focused intensity she brought to everything, a quality so specifically her mother's, that Daniel sometimes had to arrange his face carefully when he saw it. The cardiology suite at Children's Hospital was on the 6th floor. The waiting room had been decorated by someone who understood that children find comfort in predictability. The same posters, the same fish tank, the same wooden bead roller on the same low table. Every time, Lily went directly to the bead roller and began working through it with professional efficiency, moving the beads along the curved tracks in a specific sequence she had developed over 4 years of visits. Daniel sat in the chair beside her and checked his phone. One message from Priya Mehta. "System stable. Christopher's team found the collision patch. They're documenting it properly this time. Also, Samuel wants to ask you something about the Guardian Layer's cycle logic. Not urgent. Just when you have time." He typed back, "Thursday afternoon." Then he put the phone in his pocket. He sat with his daughter and watched her move the beads along the tracks, yellow, blue, red, green, yellow again, in the particular order that was hers alone, that she had developed over 4 years of sitting in this waiting room while her father watched, and the fish tank bubbled, and the light through the window moved slowly across the floor. He was not thinking about the system. He was not thinking about Arbor or Manual Layer Active, or the way the monitoring board had looked at 4:02 a.m. when everything came back to green. He was thinking that Lily had grown 2 inches since the last appointment. He was thinking that her shoes were getting tight. He was thinking that he needed to stop at the grocery store on the way home, and that there was bread at home but not the right bread, the kind with the seeds she liked, and he should remember to get that kind. He was thinking small thoughts, specific thoughts, the thoughts of a person who has learned through loss, through choice, through the long discipline of grief to be very precisely where he is. His phone buzzed once more. A new message, from an unknown number that he recognized after a moment as the facility's main operations line. All systems stable. Thank you. He looked at the message for a moment. Then he turned off the screen and put the phone away. In front of him, Lily moved a yellow bead along a curved track from one side to the other. And it clicked softly into place. And she moved the next one. And the fish tank bubbled, and Daniel Hayes sat in a chair in a hospital waiting room,